Liberty begins with a door that locks from the inside. That's not metaphor. That's the irreducible foundation of civil freedom. A body that cannot retreat into sovereign shelter is not free. It is exposed, beholden, precarious. That's why we start with the Minnesota Housing Sovereignty Act. That's why the first bill of Enlightenment socialism is a house, not a subsidy, not a voucher, a home, tangible, permanent, sovereign. But to stop there would be to misunderstand the true architecture of emancipation. A house is the first wall, not the last. Because if a man is housed, rent-free, stable, secure, but still rises every morning into the teeth of a 40-hour work week that leaves him too exhausted to dream, too drained to create, too entangled in surviving to become, then he is not yet free. He is simply caged in comfort. The bars are softer, the windows cleaner, but the clock is still his warden. This is where most liberal frameworks fail. They confuse freedom with relief, comfort with agency. But we are not here to make the machine more tolerable. We are here to dismantle the conditions that make the machine necessary. That is the difference between treating symptoms and curing the disease. Thomas Jefferson understood this, partly. He envisioned the yeoman not as a rural fetish object, but as a civic foundation. The ideal was not the farm, but the freedom it implied. That a man could rise on land he stewarded, labor as he chose, and answer to no boss, no landlord, no master. Yes, Jefferson's vision was limited by the sin of his era, but beneath the contradictions was a truth that still speaks, that political freedom is empty without material independence. The MNHSA reclaims the first half of that vision. It severs shelter from servitude, but the second half, that's harder. That's the war for time itself. Let's speak plainly. There is no freedom without time. And there is no time under compulsory labor. You cannot schedule emancipation. You cannot budget self-actualization into the margins of a 70-hour paycheck-to-paycheck life. The calendar is not liberty's friend. The clock is not neutral. Because time isn't just a measure of labor. It is the substance of life, the only true non-renewable resource. Every hour you spend doing what you must instead of what you could is an hour of your one life you will never get back. Every day lost to exhaustion, to meaningless meetings, to working 3 jobs so your kid can sleep indoors. That's not inefficiency. That is theft, existential theft. And let me be very clear. If you take a person's time, you are not just exploiting them economically. You are amputating their potential. You are robbing them of the life they might have lived. That's not policy failure. That is moral failure, systemic, generational, premeditated. Here's where the primacy of life enters, not as rhetoric, but as principle. The human organism is finite. Its energy is not endless. Its moments are irreplaceable. If your system requires that a person sacrifice their waking years just to tread water, then your system is anti-life. And no matter how democratic its elections or how plentiful its consumer goods, it is not civilized. Because civilization at its core is what we build to protect life from the cruel demands of necessity. Civilization is how we push back the frontier of toil. It is what we owe each other, not as charity, but as justice. So when we say a person should live rent-free in a sovereign home, we are not talking about comfort. We are talking about reclaiming the foundation of liberty. But that foundation is not complete unless it also includes time. And that is where the conversation must go next, because we already have the machines, the automation, the logistics, the productive capacity to reduce human labor by half, by 2/3, even by 9/10 in some sectors. We already have the materials, the knowledge, the infrastructure. The real question is not how, but why haven't we? Why are we still wringing sweat from the brows of the young to meet quotas that no longer need meeting? Why do we bind the next generation to burnout, to anxiety, to time poverty when we have the means to liberate them? The answer, as always, is power. Because a person who controls their own time is harder to govern, harder to sell to, harder to scare. A person who wakes up in a house they own with no rent to pay, no boss to fear, and no debt chain around their neck, that person is dangerous. That person is unmanageable. That person is free. And freedom, real freedom, not the bumper sticker, not the brand, is the enemy of every empire. So let's make it plain. If we pass the MNHSA and stop there, we have built only half the bridge. Shelter without time is like breath without lungs, a miracle wasted. We must go further. Because liberty does not end at the doorstep. It begins there, and it reaches forward, outward, into every hour not yet spent, into every day reclaimed from the machine. This is the architecture of emancipation. A foundation of shelter, a structure of time, a future of freedom. And if we have the tools to build it, then what possible excuse do we have not to?